Hello, I'm John Rossi, a touring drummer with a love of all things animal. When I'm on the road, I visit as many zoos, aquariums... Hey, wait a minute. What's going on? Hey, what's going on there? Hello? 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 We interrupt your regularly scheduled program to bring you Rossifari Zoo news. News you can use from the world of zoos and conservation. Every week, we bring you breaking news and analysis from around the globe, featuring the animals you love and the people who care for them. And here's your anchorman, John Rossi. Hello, 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 and welcome back to Rossifari Zoo News, your look at everything going on in the world of zoos, aquariums, conservation, and general animal weirdness. All right, so y'all might be getting sick of hearing about it by now, but my big personal news for this week is the same as the last two. It's going to be all about the new house. So 2 weeks ago, I told you about it. Last week, I told you we were heading to closing the day the episode dropped, and so now we have actually moved in and started setting the place up. And y'all, I love it. I already loved the house, but doing the things to make it our own has been an absolute blast. And this is actually zoo and aquarium related, as a big part of everything has been setting up the new podcast space and figuring out what to do with the cool animal art and other fun things I've been gifted as this podcast has gone on. There are so many cool things. Miles right now is into a game called Splatoon. And Zoe turned his room into a tribute to Splatoon and Mario. It is ridiculous and colorful and something that I could have never done in a million years. And it is absolutely amazing. Possibly the best animal part so far is that, so we have a staircase that turns in on itself. So it's a 2-story space, but the stairs go up halfway, then there's a little landing, then you go up the rest of the way in the opposite direction you started going up. Does that make sense? There's probably a name for this, but I don't know archaeology terminology. Just said archaeology, and I'm leaving it in because I love you all, and that's really funny. But yeah, architecture is not my thing. But anyway, it leaves this big wall space to fill up, and I came up with the brilliant idea of hanging my Iggy banner on it. Now, if you don't remember, Iggy was an older red panda at Zoo Atlanta, one of the first pandas I fell in love with. And episode 4 of this podcast was an interview with Danica, Iggy's primary keeper, after Iggy passed away. And back when Iggy was at the zoo, they had this huge banner hanging up with a picture of her that said, Iggy, real panda, real diva. And I got one of those banners, and it's now hanging proudly in our staircase, and I could not be more excited about it. And both Tuesday's episodes, intro and outro, and all of this episode are being recorded on my new podcast desk in my new podcast studio, and I'm just so excited about all of this. But okay, enough about all of that. Thank you, though, for wanting to hear about my life and stuff, because honestly, I would feel weird sharing all of that kind of stuff on a podcast if I didn't hear from so many of you that love it when I do and reach out and talk to me about things I talk about here and all that stuff. But yeah, so you may remember that I'm heading down to North Carolina for a few shows of Great Balls of Fire this week. As a matter of fact, the day this episode drops, I'll be at Greensboro Science Center, which I cannot wait for. I'm going to be setting up a bunch of interviews there, some really different content from a facility we've already visited many times. And then I'm trying to set up another visit or two while I'm down that way. But honestly, all of the house stuff prevented me from emailing in a timely fashion. So we'll see what happens. I do have some really fun interviews coming up, though, including some new facilities that we'll be featuring for the first time. So that'll be fun. And I think that's all that's really in my world right now. So let's get to this. All right, so we are going to start with a really fun and interesting story about a new paper that has been published looking at the effects of zoo-led interventions on visitors' knowledge and beliefs that was published in the Journal of Conservation Biology recently. And yes, I did say really fun and interesting. And then as I was reading the rest of the words I said, I realized, wow, this really is a nerdy niche podcast, isn't it? Anyway, before I get to the conclusions of the paper, I want to start off by saying that there have been a lot of papers done looking at the type of thing we're talking about here. Heck, I even did some research into it myself for a class in my master's program. The results have varied wildly, which is not entirely surprising when you consider the fact that no two zoos are exactly the same, and that conservation education is a growing and ever-changing field. As a matter of fact, it took me a long time to start using the term conservation educator to describe myself, and I only really felt comfortable doing so after I realized that so many people who use that term don't really have an all-encompassing view of what exactly that term means. But getting back to the paper, it was actually a comprehensive analysis of 56 peer-reviewed and published studies. So the goal was to give a kind of macro view of the individual studies that have been done so far on this topic. The full paper is titled A Meta-Analysis of the Effect of Visiting Zoos and Aquariums on Visitors' Conservation Knowledge, Beliefs, and Behavior. The paper defines the term zoo-led intervention as anything the zoo or aquarium does to try to inform guests about conservation issues. This can include static signage, interactive signage, presentations, etc. The paper also points out that there is currently no standardized methodology for designing, describing, or evaluating interventions in zoo-led research. This could also be a reason why the results from the various studies I've seen have been all over the place. There's no actual standardized way to measure what the interventions are or how successful they have been. Therefore, the authors of the paper decided to look at the nature of interventions in other, better defined disciplines such as health and clinical psychology, and they ultimately settled on the behavior change technique taxonomy from clinical psychology as a good established framework to examine zoo-based interventions with. Now, don't worry, I'm not going to go all into the weeds on all of this. Suffice it to say that by borrowing an already established psychological framework from psychology, the authors of this paper were able to examine a bunch of studies using the same criteria, meaning their results are probably more accurate than compared to each individual study which had its own criteria. Now, the types of interventions the study examined include digital, exhibit design, formal education, meaning zoo-led education programs, general school field trips without a formal education component, i.e. all the kids go to the zoo and explore with chaperones while John runs away from the various groups of kids as though they are zombies and he's the last man standing in an episode of The Walking Dead. General visit, or, what most of us do every time we head to the zoo. Keeper talk, live animal interaction, which is a category that includes presentations, shows, feedings, etc., multimedia presentations at zoos, such as touch screens, video presentations, etc., signage, which in this case just meant the static signage, meaning graphics, banners, maps, and then other for interventions that don't fit any of those categories. And in total, this meta-analysis looked at 56 primary studies, which provided 75 distinct comparisons between types of zoo-led interventions and 199 effect sizes that represented the effect of the interventions on outcomes. Okay, so with all of that jargon out of the way, what did the analysis conclude? On average, visiting zoos had a small to medium positive effect on visitors' beliefs about conservation and on their behavior, with a large amount of variance between the individual studies, as I mentioned at the top of this deep dive. But despite that variance, the overall effect is the same. There is a net positive when people visit zoos and aquariums. The paper included the data from every study they looked at, but they did go on to say that if a few outliers were removed, it became even more clear that zoos and aquariums have a positive impact on the conservation views and behaviors of guests. However, the outliers were left in the main paper as the authors could not identify any biases that would lead them to be outliers. So diving into the results a little bit more fully here, the categories of conservation knowledge and intentions, meaning the desire to incorporate more conservation behaviors into their lives, saw the most success, with attitudes and self-efficacy seeing medium to small changes, and actual behavior changes seeing a small effect. In other words, people who visit zoos and aquariums are going to see a decent growth of their conservation knowledge and their desire to change, and a smaller amount of growth of their awareness of their own effect on things and their overall attitude towards conservation, and then a smaller effect on their actual behaviors. Which, when you think about it, isn't that kind of how all change works? We all want to change, but then, struggle to really do so. So that makes sense and is a really good sign that even actual changes, even if it was a small amount of change, it's still an amount of change. And as far as what interventions caused the most change, well, by far and away, the most effective were formal education interventions. General visits and live interactions with animals had small to medium effects. Exhibit design changes had a small effect on outcomes. So breaking away from all of the, specific scientific terminology in the paper, what does this actually mean? Well, it shows that zoos and aquariums are having a positive effect on the conservation knowledge, intentions, and behaviors of guests. This is absolute. This is happening. Now, the amount varies from study to study and from method to method, but at the end of the day, the analysis shows that everything currently being done in these incredible facilities is actually having a positive impact on guests from a conservation perspective. And this is really great news, as there has been a lot of debate about this, looking at some of the individual studies without having a framework in which to compare them all. Now we have that, and the news is good news. Yay! But beyond that, I have one additional thing I wanted to say about this. I've actually been at zoos a few times when studies like this were being done, either internally or for papers that might be published. A lot of times, the studies use questionnaires, and I always feel super awkward when that happens because of the framing of a lot of the questions. For instance, one of the questions I've seen repeatedly is phrased something like, "Did you learn anything new about an animal species during your visit today?" And honestly, it's pretty rare that I learn something new when I'm just visiting a zoo nowadays, especially if it's a zoo I've been to before, because I've probably read all the signage and have often met many of the animals and such. I didn't see this kind of thing addressed in the meta-analysis, though it may have been addressed in individual studies. If not, though, that means that people like me, and probably most of you listening, who are obsessed with zoos and go and are incredibly impacted by them, but also don't necessarily learn something new every time or anything like that, we may actually be contributing to the negative numbers on some of these studies, depending on how they are worded. Which, if that is the case, is actually just more good news about the positive effect of zoos. Yay! I very specifically remember a time where I was asked to fill out one of these surveys. It was at the Jacksonville Zoo. And I struggled so much because I wanted to give all the best answers, but I wanted to be honest. They said it was very important to be honest. And I hadn't learned anything new that day. But that's because it was all stuff that I had learned from other amazing accredited zoos and aquariums that I had read that day. And I still loved it, and it still deepened my passion for, zoos and animals and conservation and all that good stuff. So yeah, it's an interesting thing that I haven't seen these studies address, but I digress. So that is the really good news headline story. We now have a way to say that we know for sure that zoos and aquariums do have a positive effect on the conservation beliefs and actions of the people that go there. That's amazing. Yay!
All right, we'll be back after this quick break.
Hi, this is Kathy Hill from the Indian River Lagoon National Estuary Program. We're all about restoration projects in progress this season on One Lagoon, One Voice. Learn about the great strides the lagoon community is taking to restore and protect the Indian River Lagoon. Each week, we dive deep into discussions with scientists, resource managers, and nonprofit leaders to explore lagoon issues and solutions. From oyster reefs to clam restoration, algae blooms to muck, you'll learn all about the projects we're tackling to bring the Indian River Lagoon back to health. Click the link in the show notes to follow One Lagoon, One Voice, learn about the IRL Council, and explore our unique lagoon.
And that brings us to births and deaths for the week. But I'm going to try something slightly different this week. So every week I feel like I try to make a story out of each birth and death. But when I listen back, some of them really feel like it's too much. Like, yes, every giraffe birth is important, but there are also weeks where there are like 4 of them. And I don't really think anyone listening is losing their mind with excitement to find out the name of the parents or that, yes, all 4 were born healthy. So I may drop a fact or two here or there, or even share a full story about a birth or a death if it seems appropriate. But I'm going to try to do these more as like a list and just kind of see how that feels. Also means I can put in more other Zoo News stories, in that same amount of time. So please let me know what you think about this approach, as it's very much just something I'm trying for right now. But like, to be honest with you, I've thought of just stopping with births and deaths unless they are something that very much impact us from the perspective of the podcast or, facilities that I really love or animals that are popular or whatever. So let me know your thoughts on all of this, because really this podcast is for all of you. But let's get to our births. The Edinburgh Zoo in Scotland has announced the birth of 5 endangered northern rockhopper penguin chicks. And that is going along with their 10 Gentoo penguin chicks that have come along recently. So pretty exciting news there. Mystic Aquarium has announced the birth of a male harbor seal pup that was actually born on Mother's Day. Very cool. Cheyenne Mountain Zoo announced the birth of 2 Rocky Mountain goats. These are twins and are absolutely adorable. Metro Richmond Zoo announced the birth of 3 capybara pups, or caplets. St. Augustine Alligator Farm announced 2 different hatchlings recently, a Malaysian giant turtle and a Southeast Asia box turtle. A baby poodoo named Pearl has been born at the San Diego Zoo Safari Park. And last but not least, the Toledo Zoo announced the birth of 2 red-ruffed lemurs named Borealis and Aurora. And that brings us to our deaths for the week. The Detroit Zoo has announced the passing of Lucius, who was a North American river otter that lived at the Detroit Zoo since 2009, who passed away because of the sudden onset of gastric dilation and volvulus, which is the medical term for a flipped stomach, something that we hear about happening with dogs and such. He had a really strong personality and always got along well with the other otters at the zoo and will be greatly missed. The Detroit Zoo also announced the passing of Solaire the water monitor that has been at the zoo since February of 2015. Unfortunately, due to his advanced age, there were some underlying medical issues and severe arthritis that caused pain and discomfort. And as often happens, they treated him medically for a while, but then that seemed to stop working. So the correct decision was made to humanely euthanize him. And then our last story in this category is really sad and actually a birth and a death. Zoo Atlanta announced the birth of an infant crowned lemur on May 20th, and unfortunately was found deceased the day after the announcement was made. Sava, the mother of the lemur, was an experienced mother who had reared 3 other offspring, but something happened, and they're not quite sure what. Don't know exactly what happened, but unfortunately, this little one came into the world and then left it. It's very sad, and I'm just sending all my love to the primate team at Zoo Atlanta for having to go through this absolutely challenging experience. Sending all the love. And moving on from our births and deaths, we get to the rest of our zoo news section. So we'll start this section with the big news I'm sure you all saw this week. Pandas are coming! That's right, pandas are coming! And we even know which pandas they are. I'm talking, obviously, about the red pandas that are finally going to be able to be seen at Lehigh Valley Zoo! Oh, wait, did you think I meant another set of pandas? Maybe a different kind of panda? Yeah, we'll get to them. But yes, you may remember that we, as a Rossifari community, helped to fund the creation of the new red panda habitat at Lehigh Valley Zoo. We'll even have Rossifari listed on the exhibit there. Well, that habitat will be opening this week, and I'll be attending a preview for it on Thursday. And I'll get to see Cosmo and Miko, the red panda brothers that have moved to the Lehigh Valley Zoo from the Birmingham Zoo. I am so excited to see this completed habitat and to see these two adorable red pandas. And of course, I am excited about those pandas, but there was another big panda announcement this week about giant pandas. You may have heard that Smithsonian's National Zoo has announced that giant pandas will be returning to their facility by the end of the year on a 10-year lease with China. The two pandas who are coming are named Bo Li and Ching Bo, and they will be home in DC before the calendar changes to a new year. This is obviously huge news, and I'm really excited about it. As I mentioned in previous episodes, it's been pretty obvious that this was going to happen, and I may have even had some insider knowledge that it was coming. But now it's official, and it's out there, and that is great news. I know that the panda team at the zoo is incredibly excited. Moving on from pandas for a minute, the Milwaukee County Zoo announced that one of their giraffes, Kendi, recently underwent a successful surgery after a unique breeding injury. While the press release didn't go into too much detail, I did reach out to the zoo and found out a little bit more about the injury and the procedure. And without going into too much more detail, it turns out that our buddy Kendi managed to damage a part of his penis that is similar to the human foreskin. And while that's not common amongst giraffes, or humans, thank goodness, it is something that happens to horses. In fact, a surgery of this type has never been performed on a giraffe before, but it was adapted from the surgery done to repair this issue on our equestrian friends. The procedure seems to have gone perfectly, with Kendi recovering well so far. The procedure was complicated in a lot of ways. For starters, it lasted around 2 hours. Also, anesthetizing a giraffe is always a risky proposition. While the giraffe was immobilized, team members were stationed along his neck, massaging it to prevent muscle cramps and stiffness. This was one of those all-hands-on-deck surgeries, or should I say all hands on neck, with not only the zoo's vet team and keeper team involved, but also people from the University of Wisconsin-Madison School of Veterinary Medicine and team members from Henry Vilas Zoo, the Kettle Moraine Equine Hospital, and Regional Equine Dental Center sharing their expertise as well. I always love these stories about revolutionary medical procedures being done at zoos and all of the incredible collaboration involved. It's also just so cool to see a horse-based medical procedure being applied to a giraffe. I mean, they're all hoof stock, but you never really know if it's going to work. I love everything about this story, except for if I pause to think about the initial injury, because then I get all weird and ouchy about it. But other than that, love it. Love this story and love the amazing work that the Milwaukee County Zoo is doing. The Calgary Zoo is the latest zoo to make a social media post addressing very online people expressing concern, or just flat out complaining, about the behavior of an animal. In this case, the post is about Siku the polar bear. The post starts off by saying that Siku has recently been seen walking along his habitat fence line more regularly, which admittedly can be a concerning behavior, though it isn't necessarily a problem. In the post, the zoo explains that they have an animal care, health, and welfare team, and that the team has been observing the behavior and believe that it is a mixture of being interested in the people watching him and also anticipating snacks. The post then goes on to say they are adjusting Siku's diet to ensure longer periods of satiation and are also going to temporarily modify elements of Siku's habitat and sightlines to see if these changes will promote a change in behavior. Now, I really love the transparency in this post because it addresses the concerns people have seen, explains that the behavior isn't what the most negative people are making it out to be, but also explains the steps they are taking to better understand and even change the behavior in question. Now, animals pace for a variety of reasons, including anticipation of good things like feeding times or even getting to go into their indoor holdings at the end of the day. Seeing an animal pace does not necessarily mean there is a problem, but it also can mean there is one. So I really love the approach the Calgary Zoo is taking to exploring what is going on with their bear while also, explaining what people are saying and kind of defending it. They also say in the post that some of the changes may affect guest viewing angles, but that their focus is on providing the best care for Siku, which is exactly as it should be. So great work all around by the zoo. A flamingo that lives at a nature reserve in Norfolk, England, has laid an egg for the first time in her life, at the age of 70. The bird in question has been called unlucky in love, having never had a successful breeding attempt until now. And this is particularly incredible since flamingos are only expected to live until the age of 40 or so. So 30 years after she easily could have passed, she has instead finally laid her first egg. Now, at her age, it's very unlikely the egg will be viable, but still, what an amazing story. You go, girl. Age is just a number indeed. I mean, heck, who knew a flamingo could also be a cougar? The Perth Zoo has announced a $51 million upgrade, including a new primate crossing area. The area is called this because gibbons will have rope pathways they can use to cross and swing directly above guests that hang out on their human pathways below. Beyond this incredible addition, the area will also triple the size of the gibbon habitat. Awesome innovation in exhibit design? I am here for it. The Rosamond Gifford Zoo in Syracuse recently took part in an impromptu conservation effort. The zoo was contacted when a rare piping plover was predated, leaving a clutch of eggs unattended. The clutch was transferred to the zoo, where the eggs were incubated and candled, and all 4 of the eggs were found to be viable. The eggs are currently being cared for at the zoo until they can be transferred to the Detroit Zoo, where the chicks will be hatched, and then they will be reared at the University of Michigan until they are capable of flight, at which point they will be released back into the wild. Such an amazing amount of work and collaboration to save 4 eggs, but again, this is why I love zoos and aquariums so much. A fun little story from the Red Panda SSP. A male panda named Flint has moved from the Belfast Zoo to Amazon World Zoo Park on the Isle of Wight with a breeding wreck with their female red panda, Zhao. What makes this story interesting is that Flint is 10 months old and Zhao is 10 years old. That is a huge discrepancy in ages for pandas, and often, pandas stop breeding at or before the age of 10, so the move is clearly hoping to produce cubs this breeding season. Now, 10-month-old pandas and 10-year-old pandas have a very different approach to life and how interactive and playful they like to be. So it's definitely going to be interesting to see if this match will work out, or if Zhao is basically going to do the panda equivalent of shouting, "Hey kid, get off my lawn," at Flint. Who knew pandas could be cougars too? By the transitive property of cougars, does that mean that flamingos are pandas? Anyway, moving on. The ABMA, which I'm not supposed to call the ABMA, but which is clearly the ABMA, is hosting a 4-series course focused on behavior management that is open to anyone wanting to learn more about this subject. The 4 courses are Introduction to Training, Introduction to Enrichment, Introduction to Welfare, and Communication and Working in Teams. Each of these include 1 course per month and 2-hour-long pre-recorded webinars. You can sign up for each class individually or sign up for all 4 to save some money. The individual courses are $25 for ABMA members and $75 for non-members. And the full cohort, which is what they are calling all 4 of them bundled with extra perks, can be purchased for $150 for members and $250 for non-members. Now, if you buy the cohort, you get a limited number of participants working with you, an additional 1-hour Zoom Q&A after each course, a private community group for discussions and networking, and recordings of all the content for a full year. I highly recommend checking this out, whether you're looking to expand your career or even if you're just interested in learning more about a lot of the stuff we talk about on this podcast. Also, memberships start as low as $45 per year and have a bunch of additional benefits as well. So you might as well just become a member and then sign up for all the courses and save that money. Next up, we have a huge shout out to the South Carolina Aquarium PR and marketing team. So it is currently Mental Health Awareness Month, and the team interviewed staff members at the aquarium to discuss what they do during their workday to make a positive impact on their mental health. The resulting reel was very authentic and really quite engaging, and I highly recommend checking it out. I love the focus on mental health in a field that often doesn't address the concerns of, burnout and compassion fatigue and just other mental health issues in general in public ways, or frankly, enough. So I really love seeing that. And then last but not least in the Zoo News segment, Costa Rica officially has decided to close all of the state-run zoos in the country, leaving only private zoos standing after this time. All of the animals in the state-run zoos will be transferred to wildlife rescue centers. And I find this to be interesting, of course, but it's also worth mentioning that the very online anti-zoo crowd has made much more than a meal out of it. They are claiming all zoos in Costa Rica are being shut down, which is not true. It is also worth mentioning that many of the wildlife sanctuaries in Costa Rica are beautiful and well run, but also are a big part of ecotourism, which is huge in Costa Rica. And they have animal experiences and stuff like that that would be more akin to what you would see in an accredited zoo in the United States than not, honestly. And that's where a lot of these animals from the zoos will be going. So it's not quite like they're just going back out into protected wilderness, though some may be released back into the wild. That's all being determined. But anyway, while the articles written about it all love to say, that Costa Rica is closing all of the state-run zoos. The number of state-run zoos currently in Costa Rica is 2. So Costa Rica is closing 2 zoos and sending a lot of those animals to sanctuaries where they will still be observed and even interact with humans. It's not quite the same story that the headlines make it out to be. But still, for a very green country that has done a lot to support the wildlife that lives there, it's interesting to see this step. And I will be curious to see what effect, if any, this actually has on the country. And that leads us to Stereotypical Animal Podcast theme song. Here to bring you to conservation news. All right, so we have to start off with a bummer of a story, but it's just really important. So we often talk about the effects of extreme climate and weather issues on animals, and this story is a stark example of just that. At least 138 howler monkeys have been found dead in Mexico just since May 16th of this year, thanks to a heat wave that has seen days reach 113 degrees Fahrenheit or 45 degrees Celsius. This heat wave is being blamed on climate change and the incredibly forceful El Niño that is currently happening, which of course is as forceful as it is because of climate change. And yeah, the monkeys have literally just been falling out of trees, either already dead or basically dead. When the bodies are collected, they're found to be in a state of severe dehydration. It's just an absolutely ridiculous story illustrating just how much we are destroying this planet. We are literally just cooking monkeys in trees, y'all. It's not okay. But on a happier note, NAPSA and Asia for Animals are supporting Report It Week, a week dedicated to encouraging the reporting of harmful animal content on social media. Their stats show that the more times the content gets reported, the more attention social media platforms pay, even if it takes time. In total, of the links they tracked, 47% got removed once they encouraged people to start reporting them. And while that's clearly not nearly as much as one would hope, it is still almost half of the negative links that get removed, which does make a huge difference. So report stuff when you see it, and even if you don't see an immediate response or removal, or even if you get a response from the social media platform saying the content is allowed, isn't problematic, won't be removed, whatever, know that there is still a good chance that others are reporting it and that it will eventually be removed. The more aware people become of this overall impact, the more likely it becomes that the 47% will keep rising. An organization called the Biodiversity Group has recently unveiled a new tool that is going to greatly help us understand wild animals. The non-invasive Advanced Taxonomy Utility for Research Expeditions Scanner, or that gets shortened to the Nature Scanner, takes non-invasive 3D scans of live animals, removing the need for biologists to collect specimens in certain instances. This hands-off approach is especially important when trying to get data about the external characteristics of endangered animals, when disrupting even one animal can have huge consequences on the population. Now, I know I can be a bit of a curmudgeon about technology sometimes, mostly just AI and social media. I actually am a huge tech nerd in a lot of ways. But this is very, very cool. I actually think a lot of the emerging technologies out there are going to completely redefine conservation biology in the next few years. And speaking of technology, camera trapping technology continues to improve. And with better cameras, longer lasting batteries, night vision, etc., it has become far easier to learn what is happening in remote areas of the world without having to be there for extended periods of time. Field work without the field, so to speak. And the latest way this technology has made an impact on conservation is a rediscovery. The IUCN Pangolin Specialist Group recently teamed up with Panthera to examine camera trap data set up in Senegal. And they captured a photograph of a giant pangolin, which has not been seen in the country for 24 years and were thought to be extinct in the area. This is a huge find and was only one part of a study that documented 46 total mammal species, helping scientists to better understand the diversity of the area. And they got to learn all about this biodiversity while not having to leave a building, with flushable toilets. So technology is really helpful for this whole conservation thing.
It's time for other news. It's time for other news. Hey, right now it's time. It's time for other news. Hey, it's a segue to the part called other news. All right, we'll be back after this quick break.
What if I told you scientists discovered 100 new species in the deep ocean?
Why did crocodiles survive extinction?
Megalodon. How did it go extinct? Hey, it's me, Forrest Galante, wildlife biologist. You might know me from Joe Rogan's podcast or my various TV shows like Extinct or Alive and Shark Week. Join me and my friends as we dive into the wild world of animal anomalies and everything wildlife. Don't miss out. Click here to uncover these mind-blowing animal mysteries.
A new documentary called Queer Planet has dropped, and much like the book Queer Ducks that I interviewed the author of, it is a look at the queer behaviors that run rampant in nature. This is important for a lot of reasons, but most notably because a lot of homophobic people use the phrase, quote, "it's not natural," to describe their feelings. And yes, that's what they all sound like. But it turns out they're actually factually incorrect. In fact, as the film states, over 1,500 species have been documented and observed performing same-sex interactions, no different than what we see in human society. Now, with my life being crazy right now, I have not had the chance to watch it yet, but I do plan to in the near future. And I'd like to recommend that everyone listening check it out yourself, and then go and leave some reviews and some good comments about it on review sites and social media sites, especially IMDb. Because, as you can imagine, there is a large group of right-wing individuals that have come together to attack and review bomb the film without watching it, obviously, trying to drop its rating on IMDb all the way to 1 star. And these people are so offended by the idea of the film, by the idea of queer people. And they're apparently so bored with their own lives that they have nothing better to do than try to take down a film they haven't seen and that, frankly, isn't made for them, although I'm sure the filmmakers wish they would watch it and learn. It's really just sad and pathetic. And, at least you can help by being a voice for the positive for the film. I know I plan to once I am able to watch it. Bradley, a Japanese macaque that was privately owned, recently escaped its house in Walterboro, South Carolina. A Japanese macaque. That's a species that you can't even find in most zoos in the U.S. But some dude owned one in South Carolina. Great. What could possibly go wrong? Oh, right. It escaped. We covered that already. That's what could go wrong. But that's not all. When the owner couldn't corral Bradley, he asked for help from the sheriff's office and animal control, both of whom stepped in as well, warning citizens to stay away as, stressed primates can be bad news. They also did try to help capture Bradley. Now, the escape took place on Thursday, May 23rd, and Bradley remained at large until May 27th, at which point it was reported he had been captured by the owner and returned home safely. But then, on the 29th, that statement got amended to say that Bradley had been captured and returned home, but that he hadn't been captured alive. And look, I feel for the owner, I do. I'm guessing he loved Bradley very much in his own misguided way. But exotic animals like Japanese macaques should not be kept as pets. This is a species that lives in groups with very complex social hierarchies that strongly influence their behavior. Keeping one as a pet and keeping it alone, even one that is beloved, is akin to torture. And then, when it escaped, it was free for multiple days, in which it could have severely disrupted the local ecosystem. And in the end, Bradley died. It's just ridiculous that this animal was allowed to live at a private residence in South Carolina. And, since I hate to be all ragey on here without some fun, I have to admit I did laugh at the, I guess you would call it poor PR that occurred as the story wrapped up. The macaque was captured, but he wasn't captured alive is a hell of a spin. And it did make me laugh, even in my annoyance about this whole situation. My listeners, to you I say, if any of you ever get captured, I hope that it's the captured alive kind. And okay, so I'm not much of a sports fan outside of the NFL football, which I love. But there was a record set in a sport recently that really spoke to me. In Major League Soccer, the new world record is 161 seconds. And what is that the record for? The most time an animal has spent on the field during a match. That's right, Rakino, The raccoon, as he has been named by MLS fans, spent 161 seconds running around on the field of an MLS match between the New York City Football Club and the Philadelphia Union before being caught and escorted from the field. He showed such dexterity in evading capture that he was given the name Raquino as a reference to Brazilian soccer star Ronaldinho, but with the rack part coming from raccoon. Raquino became such a sensation among MLS fans that Topps, the trading card company, has already released an official Raquino trading card. And don't worry, he was released back into the wild unharmed. Yay, Raquino!
Animal, animal, animal holidays. Animal, animal, animal holidays.
All right, so today is the last month of May, which is National Duckling Month, National Lake Cleanup Month, and No Mow May. Ironically, as I've been recording this episode at my new place, I had to pause repeatedly for multiple hours because the HOA was mowing our lawns here, and then trimming, and then leaf blowing them, all the things. It was very much Mow May today here. Well, we tried. Anyway, that brings us to June, which is Zoo and Aquarium Month, World Oceans Month, and Orca Month. Then our individual days are May 31st, which is World Parrot Day. June 1st is Butterfly Education and Awareness Day, International Ungulate Awareness Day, World Reef Day, and Dinosaur Day. The 2nd starts Deep Week, which runs from the 2nd to the 8th. The 4th is Hug Your Cat Day. The 5th is World Environment Day. And the 6th is Caribou Day. And those are your animal holidays for the week. All right, and there you have it, folks. Another episode of Rossifari Zoo News is done. Don't forget to be back here on Tuesday for another exciting interview episode. But of course, before we head on out, we have some thanks to be given. First of all, I'd like to say thank you to my Red Panda level patrons, Dr. Laura Shank, Dr. Stephen Williamson, Barbara Bennett, and Jenny Owens. Then I'd like to thank everyone who contributed stories this week. That list is Anya Keene, Colleen Linehan, Kim Cooley-Croninger, Carrie Kirkpatrick, Kevin Williams, Dr. Laura Shank, Elizabeth Charles, Jay Meredith, Emily Rockbuck, Lynn Vesley-Gross, Kristen Khalil, Matt Patford, Kim Purum, Ann Yoshioka, Tiana, Crystal Chapman, Elizabeth the Lizard Dunleavy, Kay Malensky, Allie Malensky, the Malenskys, Dr. Zoe Rossi, Sam Evans, Emily Poche, Andrew King, Sherry Weiss, and Michaela Baratka. Thank you all so much for your contributions. And remember, friends, the words Newsy credits backwards are Steider. Yes, way. The Rossifari podcast is produced, hosted, and engineered by John Rossi. Editing and fact-checking by John and Dr. Zoe Rossi. Our theme song is Sevens by Nathan Burke, performed by Nathan and John. Interrupting John theme and additional voices by Taylor Isaac Gray. You can reach John directly on Instagram and Facebook at Rossifari or by email at rossifaripod@gmail.com. Rossifari is part of the Daydreamer Media Network. Now, stop listening to me and go visit a zoo. The paper defines the term zoo-led intervention